Stealth games have been a bit of a slump lately, like many other genres. They're a lot more difficult to make, requiring more attention to detail and a greater understanding of more difficult systems like lighting and AI. And yet there have been attempts both old and recent to ensure the art of subtlety remained alive, Arkane's Dishonored being among them.
It ain't never safe for the likes of me.
Oh God.
Notable for at least taking stealth seriously compared to most other games, it has since been washed away by the studio's more recent failings. And yet, in retrospect, both it and its sequel suffered from problems that its inspiration never faced. One of the first true stealth games which set the bar for those after, Thief. Arkane has always been enamored with Looking Glass, for better or worse, and their attempt to create a spiritual successor to Thief could best be described as having the same problem which afflicted most other games of the 7th console generation. It had an identity crisis. There is a fundamental disconnect between the way these games treat their stealth mechanics, which colors the entire experience of playing either one. Both games have the appearance of stealth as a core concept. They market themselves as stealth games. If you ask someone if they were stealth games, they would say yes. They got sneaky guys on the cover. They have obvious stealth mechanics, so what's the issue? Well, it's simple. Thief is one genre only, stealth, but Dishonored is not. Dishonored wants to have stealth, yes, but it also wants to have an enjoyable combat sandbox for aggressive play, which ironically hampers its own design. The typical gameplay loop of a Thief level is to sneak around and steal stuff, avoiding guards and obstacles as best you can. You can knock them out or kill them, but you usually shouldn't, since Garrett is very weak in a fight, especially at the higher difficulties. Additionally, at higher difficulties, the player is outright barred from hurting enemies to increase the challenge, while requiring more loot or specific objectives to be completed before you can leave. Dishonored, however, works much more like Hitman, where you have a target to eliminate and are given a bunch of tools to do so. I don't think I could just drop down on her.
That's what I was gonna suggest, yeah. It's probably that easy.
Oh.
No.
Simply put, Dishonored works much better when you're playing aggressive than if you're just going full stealth. You have access to your full suite of abilities without needing to worry about silly story implications. In the grand scheme of the gameplay loop, however, there is simply one massive problem. It is very easy to kill your way through the entire game than it is to stealth. Too easy, in fact. The best stealth games realize that they need to limit the player in some way to make stealth look and feel like it's the best option. In Thief, Garrett is just a normal guy, very good at what he does, but not keen on getting into fights. He's not a murderer. You'd be playing the game wrong if you decide to smoke every guy you ran into in Thief. It defeats the point and isn't really all that feasible given your limitations. By contrast, Dishonored really wants you to choose not to kill everyone, but they gave you all these fun tools to do it. They made a really simple but fun sandbox that people still like today. So how can I be blamed for throwing caution to the wind and just taking people out? Perhaps the worst thing about Dishonored is its attitude towards fail states. Dishonored has a very basic and outdated view of what it means to punish the player for an action. In essence, failure on the player's part leads most often to a simple death and game over, rather than using it for an interesting gameplay element. Barriers are placed between you and your goal that only seek to kill you rather than enabling other gameplay elements to do so. That would be fine if this were something like a shooter, but it's not. It's a stealth game. In a stealth game, barriers, opponents, and the like seek to expose you before trying to hurt you, leading to more varied gameplay dynamics. It's a difference between a security camera spotting you and alerting the guards, and the security camera just blasting you with a gun. One offers unique opportunities to the player even if they are caught, while the other simply punishes them for not playing well. Just as an example, this machine here will just kill me if I get too close. There's no solid indicator of the range, and it does it almost instantly. Observe.
And so ends the life of Koro Atano.
For comparison, the Mechanist machines of the Metal Age are bulky, inefficient, and loud as hell. You could circumvent them using the same methods you normally would, but with the added difficulty of them being hard or impossible to deactivate. They present unique stealth challenges, while their Dishonored 2 equivalents present more of a combat challenge, which is kind of being generous. They won't even activate unless you get into combat near them, so if you're playing well, you might not even realize they were there. Dishonored 2 shows this hostility the most with a really shocking example. The game takes place mostly in the daytime, which is stupid because it's a stealth game. If you were going to do something sneaky, you'd wait till it was dark, like Thief, or, the first game. Anyways, the streets are populated with civilians and guards alike, which implies an element of social stealth, especially right at the beginning of the game where you can walk through the town without any issues. However, this is not the case. Guards attack on sight, a brutally disappointing decision, given it could be used for so much more. Thief made this distinction long before Hitman perfected it. Including segments or areas where being caught didn't result in a guard trying to kill you. It respected the boundaries of the setting and helped make your more stealthy and thrilling moments that much better.
Hang on.
Probably
Litmus
doing my
test.
job, but... Oh. Ah! Not...
Wow.
About your gun. Your gun do it. Wow.
Yeah.
That's bad.
You guys seeing this? What's up with that?
Sight, sound, and light are the most fundamental mechanics to a stealth game. You're trying to avoid getting caught, and so you take advantage of the ability to circumvent conflict through these sorts of methods. You avoid being seen, using obstacles in the environment to your advantage. You avoid making noise so foes don't hear you traversing the play space. You use light, or the lack thereof, to obfuscate your actions where they otherwise would be obvious. These fundamentals make the basic idea of a stealth game more or less. Remove one, and you begin to neuter the experience unless you properly adjust for it. Thief wrote the book on these mechanics in 1998. Not only did it pioneer early lighting systems, but also was the first to use it mechanically in the form of a stealth game. Guards are attentive enough to notice the player at different distances and angles depending on how well lit the player is, if they're moving, if they've made noise, or been alerted by other actions. Their willingness to investigate changes depending on their varied alert statuses, all of which is influenced solely by the actions of the player. Darkness is your best ally, the only real friend you have on these missions. You're always trying to find new patches of it or to create your own through the environment. Some lights can be turned off by flipping a switch, torches can be extinguished with water, but some can't, becoming a powerful nuisance. Sound is just as important. Every action Garrett takes makes some amount of noise, from lockpicking, falling from heights, and moving around at varying speeds on different surfaces.
I'll find you.
The game is so precise in showing what makes sound that each individual footfall from Garrett is shown and accounted for, encouraging the player to recognize how important it is. Sound is so important, in fact, that guards can detect you without even seeing you if you're making enough noise. You know that thing in most games now where they hear and then investigate but blow it off as the wind or something? In Thief, that can happen, but they also could figure that you're there and just investigate more aggressively. Dishonored fails in these categories for several reasons, but the biggest one is the detection meter.
In the game, like,
Oh, hello.
the character.
Did you see what happened when he turned around?
Yeah, I know.
His thing didn't detect me all the way,
right.
so when he turned around in the animation, he stopped seeing me, and the thing went back down.
This single mechanic is the bane of stealth games everywhere, and they now dominate every release which includes some form of stealth. Detection meters are overly intrusive, often arbitrary, and extremely limiting, as they force the AI to function in a set number of alert states, as opposed to a more free-form implementation. Detection meters always function on sight rather than other stimuli. They cannot detect you without letting you know via a visual indicator. This means that enemies can outright see you for real, without a doubt could look right at you. But if the indicator didn't go up all the way, then it's like they didn't see anything. This neuters the potential for guards and the like to be threatening without cranking up the speed at which you're detected. But if you do that, that makes another problem. Alert states begin to shift too fast for the player to react to, leading to instances where they get detected when they stuck their head out just for a second to look around.
If I wanted to, I could just walk out here right now.
Go yourself.
Just start some shit.
There. Couple this with Dishonored's total failure to account for lighting, especially in the second game, and you get an outright frustrating experience that makes stealth a real chore with or without it being the player's focus. It's just another reason why the player might as well just kill somebody if they're spotted. Damn the consequences. There's honestly very little to say, so absent are these mechanics from Dishonored. The game relies heavily on the blink spell to let you move around and avoid guards, but at that point, I'm barely doing anything then, am I? I just hit a button and I've circumvented my problem, easy.
Now let me take care of these bugs that are killing everybody.
Just check what that was.
Get off me!
Wow.
No! No! They're stinging me!
Really? They're stinging me! That's his face. I got stung
Yeah.
face.
Guards in Thief are a menagerie of imbeciles, zealots, wages, robots, and monsters who make up your main opposition through the games. They have their own little nuances, of course, but they all work on the same basic framework. They're trying to find you and have a lot of reactivity built into them that allows them to actually do that. While most have preset paths or patrols, they're able to range far from them if given the correct stimuli. Not only that, but they are all consistently threatening to the player who lacks effective combat skills or tools to defeat them if they are caught. Even if they are able to fight back, guards and civilians aren't really suicidal. Often they'll choose to run and alert others to your presence rather than to simply fight you. And in the case of the Mechanist machines, can be a part of the security system in the location itself. They all ooze character too, from the mumbling of the guards,
People work. If I ever lay eyes on the Taffer who had the bright idea of filling out reports.
to the spooky moans of the ghostly dead, to the ludicrous pre-recorded voice of Father Karras and the Mechanist robots.
I am thy servant, Karras. Command me, and I will obey.
Dishonored, however, lacks this great breadth of opponents, as well as their impressive yet simple range of states, which created the tension necessary to make stealth gameplay exciting. Stealth games are the most dependent on AI, aside from perhaps strategy games. The current industry struggles heavily with AI, and Dishonored was no different, although certainly not as bad as other games. Guards are easy to manipulate. It can mostly be ignored. At the same time, they lack the character of their thief counterparts, and at their worst are trying to be cheap imitations of them. A perfect example is the Jindosh robots from Dishonored 2. Clearly, they're meant to resemble the children of Karras. They even include the funny pre-recorded lines to give them voices. The variety, however, is terribly off. Most machines in Dishonored are easily circumvented, again because of stuff like Blink, while these robots serve only as a combat encounter with little in the way of interesting stealth opportunities. The children of Karras, though, come in all shapes and sizes, are genuinely difficult to defeat, and can be deadly if they catch you. They're also immediately unnerving compared to a normal guard. They stomp about and make mechanical noises, endlessly chanting out prayers to Karras before slurring their speech as you manage to shut them down with a water arrow.
A malfunction. A malfunction. A malfunction.
Thief was clever enough to use its varied cast of enemies to elicit all sorts of feelings as well, fear being amongst them. I won't show the Shalebridge Cradle from Deadly Shadows, but suffice to say, it's pretty spooky. Dishonored isn't so adventurous. It has its moments, and I was surprised to see that Dishonored 2 also had a level about shifting time just like Titanfall 2. Which is funny because those games came out the same year. But that's not really related to the foes, it's merely the tone and level design.
Chaos level. We should read this. Your actions affect the world around you. Taking lives will cause Emily or Corvo and their allies to grow more cynical.
Wow. What?
Thief, while originally designed as a sword fighting game, became a stealth game because the idea of being a thief was so tantalizing. It provided a good reason to sneak around, as well as a core gameplay loop of taking stuff from people. The entire series going forward would be predicated on this central idea. The game is freaking called Thief, I mean, come on. The narratives outside of this simple idea could vary wildly, becoming more dire and serious, but it never resulted in Garrett breaking character and forcing the player into a mode of gameplay they weren't expecting. Garrett sneaks around and takes stuff, breaks in and gets out, defeats his foes without them even knowing he was there, and the best part? He doesn't even need to hurt them. The basis of the entire game is perfectly sound, so long as the developers don't change too much and are aware of the implications any changes could have. Dishonored, however, is much more complicated, as it's balancing a morality system in amongst its other mechanics. In Thief, there is no question that Garrett isn't really a nice guy. He steals stuff for a living, after all. Sure, he usually only steals from the rich or other criminals, but he's not above taking from basically anyone. Pompous nobles are simply less likely to realize they've been robbed while having plenty of stuff to take in one go. Garrett is only the good guy by comparison, and often it's his actions which allow more malignant actors within the city to take control and enact their plans. Corvo, however, is a swordsman who just happens to be doing stealthy stuff. He's right at home fighting and killing as he is sneaking and choking. That would be fine on its own, but not with the morality system. If there is one thing you take away from this video, it is this. Morality systems based solely on killing being bad and not killing being good are absolutely downright awful. They are hyper-binary and remove player agency by telling them their actions will result in one specific effect regardless of their reasoning. A lot of these guys in Dishonored are real bad dudes who could use a few crossbow bolts to the chest. But if you do, then you're a bad guy with no nuance whatsoever. Furthermore, you have no right to self-defense. Killing a guard who caught you is just as severe as killing a guy who didn't know you were there, even though there's a clear distinction between the two. What's worse? All the best abilities are reserved for killing, meaning that if you want to make use of your arsenal, then you will be getting the bad ending, even if you don't want to. The story and morality system bar you from engaging with the mechanics equally, creating playthroughs that become highly formulaic without the depth that a title like Thief provides.
Will he react if you open up his cash register?
In the end, what does it matter? Taking your coin, taking your life.
Can you shut the fuck up, Corvo?
Yeah, that was an embarrassing line. Oh, he really just doesn't care.
There's combinations in there.
Oh, really? He just doesn't care that
Alright.
that you're looting his shop.
It's not a secret that Thief inspired Dishonored quite heavily, but clearly that didn't translate the way the developers might have hoped. Thief's setting was a highly original and remarkably complex world based around the city. It is a tightly packed settlement of people making their way in this fantasy world experiencing its own strange industrial revolution. Guards patrol the streets with swords and torches, assisted by inefficient street lamps getting power from some far-off transformer. The rich pay extra for fancy electric lights, while their servants live in dingy basements. The Hammerites, the only real religious group in the city, is a stark take on a faith system based around labor and the works of man. Their rivals are pagans who come from outside the walls, bringing their strange and eerie magics to places they don't belong. In amongst it all is Garrett, one guy trying to pay his rent.
Tell you what, you keepers can plant a few shrubs about town and I'll take care of me.
Your role is contextualized within the city as just one guy rolling with the punches of his era, unwittingly being drawn into it by powers unseen. There is no explanation for anything else. What the city's name is, where it is on a map, why the city's baron is away fighting a war, and who he's even fighting. All that is implied is that the Hammerites are partly responsible for the industrial elements of the world, and that's it. A simple but evocative dark fantasy world, worthy of being explored in a game like Thief. Dishonored, then, is much the same, but in all honesty, it pales in its execution. There are many similar elements, a big city or two, religious fundamentalists conflicting with more naturally inclined faiths, the rising industrialism, and yet Thief simply did it first. It did it without needing the flashy visuals and vistas. It did it by exposing you to people and locales which helped you understand, sneaking through a mechanist chapel and hearing them speak of their new achievements to the dissatisfaction of their former Hammerite brothers. Seeing the guards trudge about the city, their medieval attire and speech juxtaposed with the background. It's wordless, it's intoxicating. You'll find yourself picking up the lingo of the city, words like Taffer being used as an insult, or the stupid ye olde English employed by the Hammerites and mechanists. It's downright goofy, in a good way. These guards, these people, are just living as best they can in a world that's clearly more complicated than any of them realize. When Thief does use powerful visuals, it does so with an eye for the dramatic. The powerful, imposing presence of Angel Watch, a skyscraper sitting in the midst of a medieval city, is great. Especially once you go inside and see that the entire thing is just as big. The weird magics of the pagans, the underground crypts where you steal from the dead. The streets of the city, soft footfalls of patrolling guards dominating the soundscape. It's perfect. Dishonored is simply less inspired in a funny way. It's trying to be Thief by just imitating it instead of trying something unique. That's not to say there isn't something to the style of the games, but they feel like they're trying too hard to capture the feeling of Thief instead of being its own thing. By contrast, Arcane's Prey reboot plays similar to System Shock 2, but has a drastically different aesthetic and style to its absolute advantage. It's a visually memorable and at times spectacular game that I can't recommend enough. For Dishonored though, one could simply imagine that there's somewhere else. You can close your eyes and imagine you're back in the city, and your rent's due. As mentioned before, the guards lack the culture or camp of Thief, replacing it with the standard, I'm just a guard making my way through the world mentality. They're also often outright bad guys, which, again, detracts from the idea that you shouldn't be killing them. Thief guards could be assholes too, but killing them was a good way to get caught without much benefit. Thief used the opportunity to make their guards more interesting by putting them within the context of this silly city. They could be all sorts of funny while still actually being threatening. In Dishonored, however, guards are just guards, enemies are just enemies. They're not really anything above that. And what's worse is that guards are always the thing you interact with most in a stealth game. That's why they need to have a lot of character. Look at something like Metal Gear Solid, all the different ways you can interact with the guards or mess with them. It's intentional because they know those are the guys you're going to be meeting the most. In Thief, of course, you want to avoid them, but in games like Metal Gear or Dishonored, you want to interact with them more, whether that be killing them or knocking them upside down, hitting them with some CQC. But Dishonored just treats them like normal enemies, like any other game, squandering the potential. Arcane has sadly struggled lately. Most of the Prey devs had left the company before the Redfall debacle, and Thief is, well, Thief is dead too, by its own hand as well. In a funny twist, the Thief reboot failed spectacularly because it ended up doing the same thing Dishonored did, but in reverse. It tried to imitate the success of Dishonored and ended up making an outright awful game, without any of the qualities found in either Dishonored or its namesake. Unfortunately, this is the state of stealth as a genre. There's not much to look forward to. Our only hope being that someday someone gets fed up enough to make something that actually brings us back to our roots. If there's one thing games could benefit from nowadays, it's this. They need to be a little more subtle.
What a sorry state we're in.
Oh, I got through
As a
there.
general rule, I don't talk to strangers.
Okay, Arch.
I
Where is
don't
he?
even like to hear them
Oh no!
Get him off.